step into one of the most shocking true crime cases that captivated the entire world. This documentary dives deep into the lives of two people whose paths ended in tragedy, the night that forever changed public trust in justice, and the investigation that became a media storm. From the background of the victims to the crime scene discovery, the high-profile trial, and the aftermath that still raises questions decades later, this film examines every turn of the case with precision and detail. You will see how investigators pieced together the puzzle, why the court proceedings divided a nation, and how the verdict created one of the most heated debates in history. Beyond the headlines, this story reveals the hidden motives, shocking twists, and the dramatic impact on families, society, and the legal system. If you are fascinated by real-life mysteries, courtroom drama, and stories where truth and justice seem to walk different paths, this episode will keep you on edge until the very end. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases. And in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and please like the video. In the mid-20th century, a new generation was growing up in California. For them, the American dream meant not only stability and prosperity, but also a desire for a vibrant, emotional life. Into this world, in 1959, a girl named Nicole Brown was born. Her childhood was relatively peaceful. Her family tried to provide her with everything she needed, surrounding her with care and attention. However, for Nicole, childhood was merely a prelude to adulthood, where she would fully blossom. Even in her youth, Nicole stood out for her beauty, openness, and ability to win people over. But more importantly, she possessed a special energy, that inner charisma that allowed her to attract attention even in a large crowd. As Nicole began to mature, she quickly realized that her future lay beyond routine or working for survival. She had a zest for life, drawn to people, opportunities, and new experiences. The young woman moved to Southern California, and it was there that her life began to take shape. Working as a waitress at a prestigious Beverly Hills establishment, Nicole encountered a world where wealth and fame were almost commonplace. For many, it was just a place to work, but for her, the restaurant became a bridge between her ordinary past and her future life, surrounded by vibrant, famous, and influential people. In this new world, Nicole emerged not only as a beautiful young woman, but also as someone with a genuine interest in those around her. She knew how to listen, engage in conversation, and create an atmosphere of trust. Colleagues remembered her as someone they always wanted to work with. She rarely complained, never allowed herself to get depressed, and had a knack for lifting spirits. These qualities made her particularly noticeable to those who frequented the restaurant. Among them were actors, athletes, and businessmen. Nicole didn't directly seek fame, but the world took notice. Soon, her life became connected with someone who was already a celebrity, a former professional football player who had transitioned into show business. Their meeting marked a turning point. From a waitress, she transformed into a woman whose life now took place in the public eye. Her surroundings changed dramatically. Friends, homes, travel, parties, all became part of her daily life. But despite her outwardly glittering image, Nicole strove to remain herself. She was the kind of person who, even surrounded by America's most famous figures, continued to value simplicity and sincerity. Friends noted that Nicole possessed a rare combination of gentleness and inner strength. She could be gentle and caring, yet her character was tenacious. If she decided on something, she followed through. This quality was even more evident in her personal life. Despite the pressures of external circumstances, she always tried to act in the interests of her children and loved ones. Her two daughters held a special place in her heart. It was motherhood that defined her as an adult. She lived for her family and tried to create an atmosphere of security, despite the constant noise around her. Nicole loved beauty in all its forms. She followed fashion, not for show, but because it was a form of self-expression. Her style had a European, effortless quality, Yet it also evoked the Southern California spirit of freedom and sunshine. Her home was always filled with light, photographs, flowers, and children's toys. Friends noted that Nicole had a knack for creating a cozy atmosphere, even in large spaces that others might find empty and cold. Her social side also deserves mention. Nicole enjoyed socializing, yet always maintained a certain distance. She was constantly surrounded by people, but had few close friends. Her trust had to be earned, and once in her circle, they could count on loyalty and sincerity. In this regard, she stood out among those who frequently interacted in a world where sincerity was rare. Over the years, Nicole became a confident woman. She was no longer the young waitress who smiled timidly at famous customers. She was now part of Los Angeles high society, yet she always remained someone who valued simplicity. This contradiction made her a particularly interesting figure. On the one hand, a life filled with parties, travel, and media attention. On the other, quiet evenings at home, caring for children, and talking with loved ones about the most ordinary things. Those close to her said Nicole had a knack for seeing right through people. She didn't let the glitz obscure the truth. Her adult years were marked by a search for balance between an external world full of famous names and an internal world where love and the security of family remained paramount. This pursuit of balance became her defining characteristic. And that's why many who knew her personally described Nicole not as a celebrity wife, but as an independent individual, strong, vibrant, yet vulnerable and very alive. While Nicole Brown Simpson's story depicts a woman who lived her adult years in the spotlight and under constant public scrutiny, Ron Goldman's life unfolded differently. He was born in the mid-1960s and raised in Chicago, but in his later years, he chose California, a state that attracted those seeking new opportunities and dreaming big. Ron's childhood wasn't without its challenges. His parents' early divorce left its mark, but it was this experience that propelled him into adulthood before his peers. He realized early on that he had to fight for his own goals. Having moved to Los Angeles, he encountered a city where thousands of young people were trying to build a career every day. Some aspired to acting fame, others wanted to establish themselves in business or sports. Ron tried his hand at various endeavors, and this didn't reflect instability, but rather a hunger to find his place. Initially, he worked as a tennis instructor. The sport was his natural environment, where discipline combined with a passion for life. His students recalled him as an energetic, passionate coach who knew how to not only teach technique, but also instill confidence. Later, Ron tried his hand at the restaurant industry. In Los Angeles, restaurants are more than just places to eat. They're a vibrant scene where show business personalities, athletes, and entrepreneurs meet. Working as a waiter in such establishments required not only professionalism but also communication skills, maintaining a good reputation, and being personable. Ron fit this profile perfectly. Smiling, open, always ready to engage in conversation, he quickly became a noticeable presence among colleagues and guests. At the same time, he had ambitions that extended beyond the restaurant. He dreamed of a career in entertainment, film, or television. Like many young people in Los Angeles, he attended auditions, worked on his form, and learned to be confident in front of the camera. But he remained realistic. He understood that success might not come immediately, and so he wasn't afraid to work, earn money, and support his family. Friends described him as a man with a vibrant energy that seemed to illuminate the space. He made friends easily, and was able to maintain relationships, yet always remained loyal to his loved ones. Those who knew him best described Ron as possessing a rare combination of honesty and optimism. He had a knack for dreaming, but he was also willing to work hard to make those dreams come true. Ron's adult life was full of action, sports, work, parties, new projects. But behind the outward ease lurked a seriousness. He cared for his younger sister and for friends who found themselves in difficult situations. His desire to help others was genuine and unfeigned. He would interrupt his plans to drive someone home, offer advice, or provide moral support. This trait made him especially beloved among his friends. California in the 1990s was not only a city of opportunity, but also a place where the destinies of diverse people intertwined. It was in this environment that Nicole and Ron's lives collided. They didn't have a long history together. Their biographies ran parallel, barely touching, but at some point, Los Angeles, vast and bustling, brought them together. Nicole was already a grown woman by then, a mother surrounded by public attention, yet still seeking simplicity and sincerity. She appreciated people who didn't try to exploit her name or status. Ron, for his part, was a young man who lived not for fame, but for the energy of the present moment. For him, friendship, honesty, and openness were paramount. And it was precisely these qualities that made him attractive to many. Their social circles intersected thanks to Los Angeles's social circles. Mutual friends, acquaintances in the restaurant industry, parties, sports fields. All these spaces meant their paths were destined to cross at some point. They were different in age and experience, yet united by the spirit of Southern California, a love of the sun, sports, socializing, and the easygoing atmosphere of freedom. When viewed side by side, their biographies form a curious picture. Nicole is a mature woman who has experienced change and been in the media spotlight, yet still seeks a balance between the external world and inner peace. Ron is a young man on the threshold of opportunity, full of ambition, yet valuing friendship and honesty above personal gain. Both were people who strove for the light, for life, for simple human joys. This is what makes their stories so dramatic. Two biographies, different in beginning and course, yet converging at some point. They were both part of Southern California in the early 1990s, a world where the sun almost always shines brightly, where the beaches are crowded, where evenings are filled with the noise of restaurants and the laughter of parties. In this world, they remained themselves. Nicole, a strong and caring mother, a woman with an inner core and a warm heart. Ron, an energetic and honest young man who wanted to live life to the fullest and help others. Two destinies, two biographies, two people, each of whom could have lived their lives differently, but in the end, their paths crossed. Los Angeles, in early June 1994, was going about its business as usual. It was a warm summer evening, the city still warm from the day's heat, and the streets of Brentwood, a neighborhood known for its tranquil atmosphere and leafy neighborhoods, were immersed in silence. The neighborhood was considered safe, home to families with children, businessmen, artists, and people accustomed to a measured life behind high fences and manicured lawns. On this day, June 12th, many Brentwood residents were returning home after the weekend. The Sunday evening was quiet, the streets gradually emptied, and only a few passers-by walked their dogs or hurried home, trying to finish up their last errands before the work week began. Meanwhile, life was also going on as usual in the house on Bundy Drive, where Nicole Brown Simpson and her children lived. The house was located at the back of a quiet street, surrounded by greenery, with a neat facade and a small courtyard in front. Neighbors later recalled that around 10 p.m., nothing unusual was happening. Familiar sounds could be heard, barking dogs, the occasional car. No one could have imagined that, just a few hours later, this very street would become the focus of the city's attention. Towards midnight, a call came into the Los Angeles Police Department's dispatch center. At first, it was a routine alert. Callers reported a strange situation near one of the houses. The officers on duty were accustomed to such reports. Calls could concern loud music, suspicious passers-by, or abandoned cars. But this time, the alarm sounded different. The operational report recorded a disturbance related to the area of a house on Bundy Drive. A patrol car was dispatched. For the officers on duty, This was a routine dispatch. Sunday nights between Sunday and Monday were full of incidents in Los Angeles, and such reports rarely foreshadowed anything out of the ordinary. The roads were clear, and the officers reached the address quickly. Around midnight, the officers arrived at the house. From the outside, everything appeared peaceful. Dim lights in the windows, a quiet street, and green bushes obscuring part of the property from passers-by. But already at the gate, they noticed something that made them wary. A dog, an Akita, was standing on the path in front of the house. The animal seemed agitated. It was tugging at its leash and wagging its legs, as if trying to get attention. The dog's behavior seemed unusual. It wasn't simply waiting for its owners. It seemed insistently pointing in their direction. The officers decided to inspect the property. By the light of flashlights, they walked along the path leading to the house. At first, everything seemed in order. The front doors were closed, the windows were unbroken, and there were no signs of forced entry. But tension grew. The dog refused to calm down and continued leading the officers toward the back of the property. The night was quiet, and every footstep seemed louder than usual. Flashlights picked out bushes, steps, and details of the facade from the darkness. The officers moved cautiously, examining every meter. The street remained empty, and only the distant sound of a car broke the silence. It was approaching midnight, and the officers knew that if something had happened here, it needed to be investigated immediately. As they moved past the building, the officers noticed details that didn't match the usual picture of a quiet neighborhood. On the sidewalk near the gate, tracks resembling dark stains were visible. In the light of the flashlights, they looked like fresh marks on the concrete surface. At first, this didn't seem like anything unambiguous, but coupled with the dog's persistent behavior, such details demanded attention. The officers continued their inspection. They noticed similar tracks on the steps leading to the house's entrance. This alone was enough to raise the officers' suspicions. In such cases, procedure required ensuring the home's occupants were safe. The door remained closed, and after receiving no response to their attempts to call the owners, the officers decided to search the surrounding area. They circled the property from the rear. The streetlights there barely reached the ground, so everything was happening in semi-darkness. The beams of their flashlights glided along the path, bushes, and corners of the fence. The atmosphere was tense. Every shadow could conceal anything, and the officers moved cautiously, checking every hidden spot. The dog continued to lead them deeper into the yard, as if it knew where to look. This was a warning sign for the officers on duty. Animals often react to incidents faster than humans. A few steps down the side path, and a new detail caught the officers' attention. There were objects lying on the ground that resembled fallen items. In the darkness, it was impossible to immediately determine what they were, but it looked as if someone had been in a hurry or had stopped moving mid-stride. As the officers approached, they saw an item of clothing lying next to the items. It had been abandoned, as if it had fallen unexpectedly. These findings finally confirmed that something serious had occurred in or near the house. The officers called for backup and continued their search, moving toward the narrow passage between the house and the fence. At this point, the path narrowed. The streetlights failed to illuminate the area, leaving the police flashlights as the only source of light. Tension hung in the air. Every step could lead to the discovery of a vital clue or contact with whoever else might still be nearby. After walking a few meters, one of the officers stopped. Ahead, on the ground, a motionless figure was clearly outlined in the flashlight's light. Coming closer, they confirmed it was a person. The man lying on the ground showed no signs of life. Another figure was just a few steps away. The scene before the police left no doubt. They had discovered bodies. The officers immediately radioed the discovery, requesting emergency backup and medical assistance. The scene was secured. Within minutes of the radio call, additional patrol cars arrived on Bundy Drive, followed by an ambulance. The paramedics acted quickly, stretchers, equipment, and lights. But even within the first few minutes, their efforts revealed the situation was hopeless. An examination confirmed that both people found on the ground showed no signs of life. The paramedics checked each one in turn. The first motionless figure, a man, was officially pronounced dead at the scene. Then the paramedics moved on to the second victim, a woman. The result was the same. The paramedic recorded the report, noted the time, and pronounced the official death aloud. Afterward, officers confirmed the identities of the deceased. The woman was identified as Nicole Brown Simpson, the homeowner. The man found nearby was identified as Ronald Goldman, a family acquaintance. Their names were included in the report that night. By this point, the crime scene had already been surrounded. Police blocked off access to the street, while residents of neighboring houses watched from their windows and porches, unsure of what had happened. An air of alarm grew in the air. It was clear this was not an accident, but a serious crime. Medics completed the recording process, handing over the information to police. Further actions were transferred to the investigative team, which was expected to arrive within the next few hours. The house and surrounding area were officially declared a crime scene. Thus ended a night that had begun with a routine call and inspection. The officers had confirmed the fact. 2 people were dead. Their identities had been established. Now the next step remained, determining what exactly had happened and who was responsible. From that moment on, the case passed into the hands of investigators. After the crime scene on Bundy Drive was officially cordoned off, the street, until recently quiet and empty, became the center of a massive police operation. As dawn broke, forensic technicians, photographers, homicide detectives, and representatives from the city attorney's office began converging on Nicole Brown Simpson's home. Every action was recorded. Cordon tape stretched along the sidewalk, patrol officers stood guard at the entrances to the house, and journalists, having learned of the incident, began gathering outside the perimeter. The first step was to document the scene in detail. Police department photographers captured every detail: the position of the bodies, the distribution of stains on the pavement, objects left on the ground, footprints. Nothing was missed, as it was these fragments that formed the basis for the picture of what happened. The investigators moved carefully, marking the area with chalk and tagging each find with a numbered tag. Evidence of a struggle, several personal items, and fingerprints were found on the ground, which immediately attracted the attention of forensic experts. Soon, the bodies of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were sent to the city morgue. Forensic experts were already waiting there, awaiting answers to key questions: when exactly death occurred, what injuries caused it, and the sequence of events. The experts began with a general examination. Ronald Goldman suffered multiple injuries to his upper body, indicating a desperate attempt to resist. He was clearly struggling for his life, indicating the suddenness of the attack and the strength of his attacker. The doctor's conclusion was clear. Death was due to massive blood loss caused by deep, penetrating wounds. Nicole Brown Simpson's examination revealed a similar pattern, but an even more tragic nature of the injuries. The doctors emphasized that her death occurred suddenly, within a short period of time, and she had no opportunity to call for help or defend herself. These expert conclusions left investigators with a clear understanding. The murder could not have been random or superficial. The perpetrator's actions were clearly purposeful. The forensic reports revealed a crucial detail. The time of death for both men coincided, falling between 10 and 11 p.m. This meant the attack was synchronized and almost certainly carried out by a single person or at least a single group acting in concert. At that moment, investigators realized that this was no domestic incident or random street skirmish. Someone had come to this house with a clear intent. Now they had to determine who exactly. And although the evidence was only just beginning to come together, the circle of suspicion gradually began to emerge. While working in the morgue, officers continued to examine the crime scene. they discovered footprints leading from the gate toward the street. They also recorded stains on the grass that matched the biological material of the victims. An object resembling a glove was found in a nearby dumpster, which, as it would later turn out, would become a central element of the future trial. Each discovery was documented, building up evidence that gradually led the investigation to a specific individual. But during the first 24 hours, the police had only a disturbing suspicion. The murder was connected to Nicole's close circle. Given the nature of the injuries and the obvious emotional tone of the crime, investigators concluded that this was not the attack of a random robber. This was a crime rooted in personal relationships. The day after the tragedy, the first official interviews with Nicole's friends, family, and neighbors began. Neighbors recounted what they had seen and heard. Some mentioned noises near the house. Others said they had spotted a car nearby. It was here that the name that would later become known throughout the world first emerged. Among Nicole's closest acquaintances and relatives, her ex-husband, a famous athlete and public figure, was particularly prominent. Their marriage had ended several years earlier, but their relationship, according to friends and neighbors, remained strained. Their relationship had long been a subject of speculation, and many noted that conflicts persisted between them even after the divorce. Investigators called him in for questioning. From the very first minutes, officers were drawn to the suspect's behavior. He appeared tense, sometimes answered uncertainly, and some of his statements contradicted the information about times and routes. His alibi, in particular, raised many questions. His account of where he was on the evening of the tragedy did not match the information the police had gathered from other sources. Meanwhile, forensic scientists received the first laboratory results. Biological traces found at the crime scene matched samples taken from the suspect. Moreover, shoe prints found near Nicole's house matched the size and sole pattern of sneakers that belonged to him. For the investigators, this became a powerful argument supporting the suspicions that they were not unfounded. The key moment was the re-interrogation. The suspect was asked direct questions about the time, his movements, and the items found near the scene of the tragedy. His answers increasingly plunged him into contradictions. Investigators meticulously recorded every detail, knowing that these very statements would later be examined in court. When the police obtained expert evidence that the biological traces matched, there was no longer any doubt. An arrest was only a matter of time. On June 17, 1994, the Los Angeles police officially announced the suspect had been arrested and charged with double murder. The news came as a shock to the country. Newspapers carried front-page headlines, and television stations interrupted their regular programming. The arrest of a highly publicized figure, a former athlete, television host, and public figure, made the case of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman a central topic for millions. By then, the investigation had entered a new phase. The investigators had completed their main work, gathering a wealth of evidence, but now the main stage was moving to the courtroom. The public awaited a trial that would demonstrate whether the justice system could answer the questions lingering from the night of the tragedy. The trial of former American football star O.J. Simpson began in January 1995 and was immediately dubbed the trial of the century. The level of interest was unprecedented. Hundreds of journalists were stationed daily outside the Los Angeles courthouse. Television broadcasts of the proceedings were live, and millions of viewers nationwide followed every move of the participants. Judges and jurors were tasked not only with evaluating the evidence presented, but also with withstanding public pressure to find a clear and definitive answer to the question whether the defendant was guilty of murdering two people. From the outset, the prosecution built its strategy on presenting a chain of evidence, from the crime scene to circumstantial evidence, including bloodstains, DNA testing, and physical evidence. Prosecutors claimed they had a compelling case confirming O.J. Simpson's guilt. They intended to demonstrate that personal conflicts, past tensions, and the presence of direct evidence all fit together to form a coherent puzzle. The defense, on the other hand, immediately emphasized its distrust of the Los Angeles police and the methods used to collect evidence. The defense argued that the investigation had made numerous errors, that evidence could have been planted or collected improperly. At the core of their strategy was the premise that the justice system has no right to convict anyone if there remains even the slightest doubt about the integrity and accuracy of the investigation. From the outset, investigators understood that physical evidence alone would not be enough to convince the jury. In a high-profile case against a celebrity, it was necessary to demonstrate not only that Simpson could have been at the crime scene, but also why he might have taken such a step. This is why the prosecution focused on the personal relationship between O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson. Prosecutors presented a detailed account of their marriage and subsequent divorce. Official documents and witness testimony documented long-standing conflicts, outbursts of aggression, and episodes of domestic violence. Particular attention was paid to police calls. Over the years of their marriage, Nicole had contacted the police several times, complaining of threats and pressure from her husband. These materials were intended to demonstrate that Simpson had a history of jealousy and a desire to control her life. In court, prosecutors cited recordings of Nicole's phone calls, which included her statements about fear for her safety. These fragments made a strong impression on the audience. They created an atmosphere of anxiety and demonstrated that Nicole tried to seek help, but the system was not always able to protect her. The prosecution's key emphasis was that after the divorce, Simpson was unable to accept his loss of control. Despite the fact that their marriage was officially over, he continued to visit Nicole unannounced and expressed dissatisfaction with her lifestyle and social circle. Witness testimony indicated that Simpson could become jealous even over trivial matters. Particular attention was paid to the evening of the tragedy. Nicole was dining at a restaurant with her family, and later, family friend Ron Goldman stopped by her house to return her forgotten glasses. The prosecution argued that Simpson could have interpreted the presence of a young man near Nicole as evidence of a new relationship. This triggered him, causing a violent outburst of jealousy. Thus, prosecutors presented the motive as a combination of jealousy, resentment, and an inability to come to terms with the breakup. According to their version, Simpson perceived the situation not as the usual end of a marriage, but as a personal humiliation. This, according to investigators, is what drove him to act that night. The defense, of course, attempted to challenge this interpretation. They argued that Simpson had indeed been traumatized by the divorce, but this could not be considered evidence of his readiness to commit a crime. They insisted that jealousy and family conflicts do not equal murderous intent. Moreover, the defense claimed that the prosecution was deliberately dramatizing domestic scenes to elicit an emotional reaction from the jury. One of the key moments was the presentation of blood-related evidence. Prosecution experts claimed that DNA samples found at the crime scene and in O.J. Simpson's car matched the victim's biological materials. However, the defense questioned the methods used to store and analyze these samples. They emphasized that laboratory errors were possible and some evidence was allegedly collected improperly. This standoff between the experts became one of the most tense episodes of the trial. Scientific data became a point of contention, visible to millions of television viewers who watched in real time as each side attempted to convince the jury. The infamous glove incident proved a turning point. A leather glove found at the crime scene was presented as material evidence in the courtroom. The prosecution claimed it could have belonged to the criminal and contained traces linking it to the defendant. At the request of the prosecutors, O.J. Simpson was asked to try the glove on in the courtroom. When he pulled it on, it was too tight and, according to observers, ill-fitting. The defense immediately seized on this moment, turning it into a slogan: "If it doesn't fit, acquit." This episode became a symbol of the trial, sparking heated debate in society and seriously impacting the perception of the case. In addition to material evidence, witness testimony played a crucial role. These included neighbors, police officers, laboratory workers, and forensic experts. Some testimony strengthened the prosecution's case, while others cast doubt on it. The cross-examination of the investigator, whom the defense accused of bias and distortion of information, made a particularly strong impression on the public. During the cross-examination, facts emerged that undermined trust in the police, including statements interpreted as discriminatory. This allowed the defense to build a line of argument around the idea that the defendant was the victim of a flawed law enforcement system. The judge presiding over the trial found himself in an extremely difficult position. He had to maintain order and objectivity under enormous pressure from the media and society. The hearings were repeatedly interrupted to resolve issues regarding the admissibility of certain evidence. Each such episode became a sensation, instantly discussed on all television channels. The media turned the trial into a grand spectacle. Excerpts from the hearings were broadcast during prime time, and talk show hosts invited experts, former prosecutors, and psychologists to analyze the behavior of the defendant, the jury, and the witnesses. Newspapers published articles with headlines that read like dramatic lines from a crime thriller. For the first time in the history of modern justice, a trial became so public that its participants practically lived under the camera's gaze. Gradually, it became clear that the outcome of the case would depend not only on dry evidence, but also on how convincingly each side constructed its story for the jury. The prosecution attempted to demonstrate the cold logic of the evidence, while the defense built its narrative on mistrust of the system and human drama. This duel transformed the courtroom into an arena where every word, every gesture mattered. By the midpoint of the trial, tension reached its peak. Society was divided. Some were convinced of the defendant's guilt. Others believed he was the victim of injustice. Television ratings broke records, and it seemed the entire country was frozen in anticipation of further developments. As the trial entered its final stages, the tension inside and outside the courtroom became almost unbearable. Thousands of spectators in Los Angeles waited outside the courthouse, while millions across the country tuned in to the broadcast. The atmosphere increasingly resembled a political rally than a traditional trial. For the public, this was more than just a murder trial. It was a test of trust in the judicial system, in police work, and even in equality before the law. The final weeks were marked by lengthy and carefully constructed arguments from both sides. Prosecutors tried once again to systematize all the evidence: DNA samples found at the crime scene, traces of blood in the defendant's car, the presence of his hair on the clothing of one of the victims. They argued that there could be no coincidence, and the totality of the evidence clearly pointed to guilt. Their strategy was to present the jury with a logical chain, each link corroborating the next. The defense, for its part, employed a highly emotional approach. They reiterated the police's mistakes, the investigators' inappropriate statements that came to light during the trial, and the possibility that the forensic examinations might have been improperly conducted. The lawyers appealed to the jurors' emotions. How can you trust evidence collected by people who themselves violate the rules and demonstrate bias? It was important for them to sow at least one doubt, as it could be decisive in reaching a verdict. Once the parties had concluded their arguments, the moment everyone had been anticipating with particular anticipation arrived. The jury retired to its deliberation room. The public had been prepared for weeks of deliberations, but the decision was made surprisingly quickly, in less than 4 hours. This fact shocked observers. Many had expected lengthy arguments, and such a quick return of the jury seemed like a signal that the outcome had been decided in advance. On the day of the verdict, the entire country's attention focused on one spot. Offices suspended work, students and teachers gathered around televisions, stores broadcast live feeds to customers. Never before had a court decision generated such widespread interest. When the judge read the verdict, not guilty on both counts, a chorus of cheers erupted in the courtroom. O.J. Simpson, who had maintained a tense expression until then, breathed a sigh of relief. His lawyers embraced each other and their client, celebrating their victory. At the same time, the victims' families could not hide their shock and grief. For them, this moment symbolized that justice had not been served. The public reaction was equally mixed. In some areas, people rejoiced, seeing the acquittal as proof that the system could, after all, protect people from unjust accusations. In others, voices of outrage were heard. Millions were convinced that the guilty party had escaped punishment. America was divided, and this division was discussed for many years after the trial. However, the story did not end there. The victims' families filed a civil suit against the defendant, demanding that he be found liable for the deaths of their loved ones in a different trial, where the standard of proof was less stringent. Although the criminal court acquitted him, the civil court in 1997 reached a completely different verdict. A jury found the defendant liable for the damages caused and ordered him to pay the victims' families more than $30 million in compensation. This decision was a turning point, confirming that even after a resounding acquittal, the question of his guilt remained open. The civil trial lacked the spectacle of the criminal trial, but it reinforced the belief among a significant portion of society that the truth had finally been revealed. For O.J. Simpson himself, this was a severe blow. Financial obligations effectively destroyed his fortune, and his reputation was completely damaged. Despite the acquittal in the criminal court, in the eyes of many, he will forever remain responsible for the deaths of 2 people. The consequences of the trial were far-reaching. The legal community has long debated how media attention and public pressure can influence the course of a trial. Universities have used the case as an example for studying evidence handling, the role of experts, and jury behavior. For society, the case became a mirror. It exposed all the contradictions existing in the country, questions of trust in the police, attitudes toward celebrities, and problems of race and social order. Ultimately, the trial became more than just a story of one accusation and one acquittal. It became a national drama, the consequences of which were felt for years to come. The acquittal, the subsequent civil suit, the multi-million-dollar compensation, and the ruined life of the main defendant turned the case into a symbol of how truth and justice do not always coincide in the eyes of society and the law.